Whispers in the night. The woman, who we'll call Emily, begins noticing subtle changes in her husband's behavior. She feels the pangs of suspicion but keeps them to herself, hoping it's her imagination. The chapter builds tension, showcasing her internal struggles and the slow unraveling of trust. The unveiling. Emily follows her husband and discovers the affair. This chapter focuses on the emotional impact of seeing her husband, David, with another woman. The kiss shatters her world, but there is also a sense of relief as she has finally seen the truth. 3. Confrontation. Emily confronts David. The conversation is raw, full of anger, pain, and years of pent-up emotions. David's coldness and desire for a divorce hits her hard, but there's also a growing strength within Emily. 4. The crossroads. Emily, now faced with the reality of divorce, contemplates her next steps. This chapter delves deeply into her inner conflicts as she reflects on the life she thought she had and the new path she must take. Flashbacks to happier times and key moments in their marriage highlight the contrast between past and present. 5. Rebuilding the ruins. After filing for divorce, Emily starts to rebuild her life. She gets a new job, reconnects with old friends, and starts to explore the possibility of dating again. Her relationship with her son becomes central to her healing process. 6. A new dawn. Emily meets Alex, a man who brings joy back into her life. The chapter explores their budding romance, while Emily's lingering fears and doubts about love resurface. Trust, once broken, is hard to rebuild. 7. Baggage of the past. David's reappearance in Emily's life complicates things. He now regrets his decisions, but it's too late. Emily is torn between moving forward with Alex and the unresolved emotions from her past marriage. 8. A love rekindled. Emily and Alex's relationship grows stronger, but shadows from her previous marriage still haunt her. She opens up to him about her fears, and their bond deepens. At the same time, David's attempts to reconcile force Emily to confront her feelings of forgiveness and closure. 9. The final break. Emily decides to fully close the chapter with David. In a climactic confrontation, she releases all the pain, anger, and hurt she has carried for years. The emotional release is both devastating and liberating for her. 10. Hope in the horizon. The final chapter focuses on Emily's new life. She marries Alex and finds peace and happiness with him. The chapter ends with a message of hope, resilience, and the importance of moving forward despite the scars of the past. Writing the first chapter. Chapter 1, Whispers in the Night. Emily couldn't pinpoint the exact moment when things began to change. It was as if her life, which once followed a familiar rhythm, had started to shift in subtle, unsettling ways. It wasn't the obvious signs that bothered her at first, David's late nights at the office or the sudden attention to his appearance. Those were easy to dismiss. What gnawed at her were the quiet moments, the whispers in the night that only she could hear. Lying in bed, she stared at the ceiling, feeling the emptiness next to her. David had become a ghost in their home, present yet absent. The warmth that once filled their conversations had vanished, replaced by strained silences and half-hearted excuses. "Another late meeting," he would say, his eyes avoiding hers. But Emily knew better. There was something in the way he spoke, a careful distance in his words that left her cold. Her mind raced through the possibilities. She had heard stories from friends, marriages that had crumbled under the weight of infidelity, lies unraveling the fabric of trust. Was that happening to her now? She didn't want to believe it. Not David. He wasn't the type. Or was he? The doubt had taken root in her heart, growing with each passing day. It wasn't until she noticed the small changes that her suspicion deepened. The cologne he started wearing, something he hadn't worn in years, the way he spent more time at the gym, coming home with a new energy that felt foreign to her. And then, the nights where he would roll over, his back to her, the unspoken barrier between them growing wider with each passing night. One evening, as they sat at the dinner table, Emily studied him closely. David barely touched his food, his attention focused on his phone, his fingers tapping away in rapid succession. He laughed softly, a sound that pierced through her, making her stomach churn. "Who are you texting?" she asked, trying to sound casual. David looked up, his smile fading. "Just work," he muttered, putting the phone face down on the table. Emily nodded, though her mind screamed otherwise. The trust they once shared was slipping away, and she could feel it slipping through her fingers like sand. She wanted to ask more, to demand answers, but fear held her tongue. What if she was wrong? What if she was right? The next day, as David left for work, Emily made a decision. She was going to follow him. Emily sat in her car, her hands trembling against the steering wheel as she watched David's car pull out of their driveway. She had always imagined herself as someone who could trust easily, someone who didn't need to question the faithfulness of her husband. But there she was, heart pounding in her chest, the pit of dread growing deeper inside her stomach as David's car took a familiar route. Not towards the office as he had claimed the night before, but somewhere else entirely. She followed him, keeping a safe distance as her mind raced with 1,000 possibilities. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe this is all in my head, she tried to tell herself. But deep down, the truth was starting to take shape, as clear and unavoidable as the road in front of her. The streets blurred past, and Emily found herself in a part of town she rarely visited. Up ahead, David slowed his car and pulled into the parking lot of a small office building. Emily stopped a block away, far enough to remain unseen, but close enough to watch every move. Her breath caught in her throat as she saw the BMW parked a few spaces over from David's car. A woman stepped out of the driver's seat, young, vibrant, and effortlessly beautiful, the kind of woman who made Emily feel suddenly older than her years. She wore a fitted blouse, her dark hair falling in waves over her shoulders. Emily felt her heart lurch as she saw her husband step out of his own car, walk towards her, and without hesitation, wrap his arms around the woman. There was no mistaking the way they embraced. It wasn't the casual hug of coworkers or the friendly greeting of an acquaintance. It was the kind of embrace that spoke volumes, that whispered of stolen moments and shared secrets. And then, the kiss. Emily's vision blurred as she watched David lean in, his lips meeting the woman's in a kiss that seemed to last forever. It wasn't passionate in the way a first kiss might be, but there was a familiarity there, a comfort in the way they held each other. It was the kind of kiss that said this wasn't new. This wasn't a fleeting affair. This was something more, something that had been going on behind her back for God knows how long. Her heart shattered in that moment, breaking into 1,000 pieces that scattered across her chest, each one stabbing her with the realization of what she had just witnessed. The man she had loved, the man she had shared her life with, was no longer hers. He had already given himself to someone else. Emily couldn't move. Her body felt frozen, trapped in the weight of the betrayal unfolding in front of her. She wanted to scream, to run to them and demand answers, but all she could do was sit in stunned silence as her world collapsed around her. The minutes ticked by as David and the woman entered the building together, their laughter floating on the air behind them, oblivious to the pain they had just caused. Emily's mind raced, trying to make sense of it all. How long had this been going on? Was she the only one who hadn't seen the signs? Had their marriage been nothing but a facade for months, years even? Suddenly, the reality of her situation hit her like a tidal wave. She couldn't sit here any longer, couldn't wallow in her pain. She had to act. Her hands tightened around the steering wheel as she turned the car around and drove home, her mind spinning with thoughts of what would come next. Hours later, David walked through the front door of their home as if nothing had changed. He placed his keys on the counter, glanced at Emily, and smiled. A smile that now felt hollow, a lie wrapped in kindness. "How was your day?" he asked, his voice casual, as though he hadn't just shattered her heart into a million pieces. Emily couldn't keep it in any longer. The words burned on her tongue, desperate to be released. "Who is she?" she blurted out, her voice trembling but firm. David froze, his eyes widening for a fraction of a second before he regained his composure. "What are you talking about?" he replied, too quickly, too defensively. Emily's heart pounded in her chest as she took a step forward. "Don't lie to me, David. I saw you. Today. I followed you. I saw her. I saw everything." The color drained from his face as he stood there, caught with no more lies to tell. For a moment, he didn't say anything, as though he was weighing his options, trying to decide whether to deny it or come clean. But the look in Emily's eyes told him there was no point. She already knew. David sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Emily," he began, but she cut him off. How long, David? How long have you been lying to me? She demanded, her voice rising with the pain and anger that had been building inside her for months. He looked down at the floor, unable to meet her eyes. A few months, he admitted quietly. I didn't mean for it to happen. It just did. Emily felt a bitter laugh rise in her throat. It just happened? That's your excuse? She shook her head, tears brimming in her eyes. Do you even realize what you've done to me? To us? To our family? David didn't answer. He couldn't. The silence between them stretched on, heavy and suffocating. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and defeated. I'm sorry, Emily, but I think it's time for us to end this. I want a divorce. The words hit her like a punch to the gut. Even though she had been preparing herself for this, the finality of hearing him say it was more than she could bear. She had spent months, years even, thinking about leaving him. But when it came down to it, the pain was still overwhelming. She didn't say anything as David walked away, leaving her standing there, shattered and alone. The night after David asked for a divorce, Emily lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. She had replayed the confrontation over and over in her mind, each time wishing she had said more, or maybe less. Perhaps she should have screamed or thrown something, anything, to reflect the rage simmering inside her. Instead, all she had managed was a quiet, painful acceptance of his betrayal. Now, the quiet consumed her, threatening to pull her under. Morning crept in slowly, but the heaviness in her chest didn't lift with the light. She knew she couldn't avoid the inevitable. Another conversation. More truth. The words, I want a divorce, echoed in her ears, but they didn't feel real. It was like her life was happening in front of her, and she was simply an observer. David had left early, before she even woke, but she wasn't surprised. He was making this as easy on himself as possible. Avoidance had always been his method of dealing with difficult situations, but Emily wasn't going to allow it. She needed to face this head-on, if only for her own sanity. That evening, when David returned, she was waiting. He entered the house slowly, like he was expecting a confrontation, his face drawn and weary. Emily sat in the living room, her hands clasped tightly in her lap as he approached. Can we talk? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. David nodded, but he didn't sit down. Instead, he stood across the room, keeping a physical distance between them, as if he needed the space to shield himself from the inevitable pain of the conversation. It was a small gesture, but one that spoke volumes. He was already gone, already distancing himself from her and their life together. Why? Emily's voice broke the silence, soft but firm. Why didn't you just tell me? Why did you let it get to this point? David sighed, running a hand through his hair, clearly struggling to find the right words. I didn't mean for this to happen, Emily, he said, his voice tinged with regret. At first, it was just a distraction, something to take my mind off everything. And then, before I knew it, it was more. A distraction? Emily repeated, the words like poison on her tongue. Is that what our marriage became to you? Something you needed to escape from? David didn't answer, but the look in his eyes told her everything. I don't understand, she continued, her voice rising with frustration. I thought we were okay. I thought maybe we weren't perfect, but I didn't think it was that bad. I didn't think you could do this to me, to us. David shook his head, his expression a mixture of sadness and guilt. It wasn't about you, he said quietly. It wasn't about our marriage. It was me. I felt lost, like I wasn't enough, like I wasn't, I don't know, satisfied with anything. And then I met her, and for the first time in a long time, I felt alive again. The words stung, each one a dagger to her heart. Not enough. Had she made him feel that way? Had their life together somehow driven him to this? Emily stood up, her chest tight with anger. So this is my fault? Because you felt lost? You didn't think to talk to me about it? To try and fix whatever it was that made you feel like you weren't enough? David stepped forward, shaking his head. No, Emily, that's not what I'm saying. This isn't your fault. I didn't mean for you to think that, but I don't know how to explain it. I just know that I can't go back. Emily swallowed hard, her throat aching with the weight of the tears she was holding back. You won't even try, she said softly. It wasn't a question. It was a statement, one she already knew the answer to. David lowered his eyes, the silence confirming her worst fears. She felt the room closing in on her, the walls suffocating her with the truth she had been avoiding for so long. It wasn't just the affair. It wasn't just the betrayal. It was the loss of everything. The life they had built together, the years they had shared, the memories that were now tainted by his lies. "I loved you, David," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I loved you more than anything. I would have fought for us. I would have done anything to fix whatever was broken. But you gave up on me. You gave up on us." David's face crumpled, and for a moment, Emily thought she saw a flicker of regret in his eyes. But it was fleeting, disappearing as quickly as it had come. He looked away, his voice barely audible when he finally spoke. "I'm sorry." The words hung in the air, empty and meaningless. Sorry wasn't enough. It wasn't enough to fix the damage he had caused, wasn't enough to undo the months of lies and deceit. Sorry wasn't enough to save their marriage. Emily took a deep breath, steadying herself as she looked at the man she had once loved so deeply. He was a stranger to her now, and in that moment, she knew that their relationship was beyond saving. "I'll have the divorce papers drawn up," she said quietly, the finality of her words hitting her like a blow. "I think it's time we both move on." David nodded, but his eyes stayed fixed on the floor, unable to meet hers. As he turned to leave the room, Emily felt the tears finally spill over, hot and bitter against her cheeks. She had held on for as long as she could, had fought for their marriage with everything she had. But now, there was nothing left to fight for. The door closed softly behind David, and with it, the last piece of their life together crumbled to dust. Days turned into weeks after that final conversation with David. Emily found herself standing at a crossroads, unsure of which path to take. The divorce was inevitable, and in many ways, she was relieved. The weight of living in a broken marriage had been lifted, but the emptiness left behind gnawed at her constantly. What now? What does life look like after so many years of building something, only to watch it shatter into pieces? Emily sat at her kitchen table one morning, staring blankly at the divorce papers David had signed the night before. There, on the last page, was the finality of it all. Irreconcilable differences. Such a cold, clinical phrase for the emotional storm that had torn their life apart. She ran her fingers over the words, feeling numb. The sound of her phone vibrating on the table snapped her out of her thoughts. It was a message from Laura, her closest friend, who had been her anchor through these dark times. "Coffee today? You need to get out of the house." Emily smiled faintly, grateful for Laura's persistent care, but a part of her hesitated. She hadn't felt like seeing anyone, much less pretending that everything was fine. Still, she knew she couldn't hide forever. She replied, "Sure, meet you at the usual place." The cafe was quiet that morning, the soft hum of chatter and the hiss of the espresso machine providing a soothing backdrop as Emily walked in. Laura was already at their favorite table by the window, a warm smile on her face as she waved Emily over. "Hey, you," Laura greeted, her eyes filled with concern. "How are you holding up?" Emily shrugged, sliding into the chair across from her. "I'm surviving," she said, her voice sounding more distant than she had intended. Laura reached across the table, squeezing her hand. "It's okay to not be okay, you know?" "I know," Emily said, glancing down at the divorce papers she had brought with her. "I just thought it would feel different, you know, finalizing the divorce. I thought I'd feel free, but instead, I feel lost." Laura nodded, sipping her coffee thoughtfully. "It's going to take time. You've spent so many years being someone's wife, being part of a unit. Now, it's like you have to rediscover who you are, outside of that identity." Emily sighed, her fingers tracing the edge of her coffee cup. "I don't even know where to start." "You start by focusing on yourself," Laura said gently. "Take this time to rebuild, to figure out what you want without worrying about anyone else. And remember, you're not alone. I'm here. Your family's here, and you've got more strength than you realize." Emily gave her a weak smile. "I just keep thinking about all the years I wasted." "They weren't wasted," Laura said firmly. "You learned from them. You grew, and now you're stronger for it. You can either look at this as the end of something or the beginning of something new." Emily leaned back in her chair, letting Laura's words sink in. Maybe she was right. Maybe this was her chance to start over, to create a life for herself that wasn't defined by her marriage to David. But the idea of starting over felt daunting, like standing at the edge of a vast, unknown ocean. Later that afternoon, Emily found herself walking through the local park, her mind drifting as she watched the autumn leaves flutter down from the trees. She had always loved this time of year, the crisp air, the vibrant colors. It had been her favorite season when she was younger, long before the responsibilities of adulthood had weighed her down. As she wandered along the path, she saw families playing together, couples holding hands, and groups of friends laughing and sharing stories. It all seemed so normal, so easy for them. But for her, it was like watching a world she no longer belonged to. Her thoughts turned to her son, Ethan, who was spending the weekend with David. That was another part of this whole ordeal that ripped at her heart. The idea of splitting time with her own child. The idea that Ethan would grow up in two separate homes with two different versions of his parents. What kind of impact would that have on him? Would he understand why things had fallen apart? Her phone buzzed in her pocket again. It was David this time. She hesitated before answering, unsure if she was ready for another conversation. "Hello?" she said, her voice tight with uncertainty. "Hey, Emily. I just wanted to check in about Ethan's schedule this week. I know we talked about alternating weekends, but there's a work event coming up, and I might need to change the plan a bit. Would that be okay?" Emily closed her eyes, her patience already wearing thin. "David, we can't keep changing things last minute. Ethan needs stability right now. We need to stick to what we agreed." I know, David replied, his tone defensive. "But this is important. It's not like I'm doing it on purpose." There was a pause, the tension between them palpable, even through the phone. Emily felt the anger rise again, the frustration of years of compromise, of always bending to accommodate David's needs. But this time, she couldn't. Not anymore. "I'm trying to be reasonable here, David, but we need to think about Ethan. He's already going through enough. You can't just drop everything because of work. You made that mistake once, and look where it got us." David was silent for a moment, and when he spoke again, his voice was softer. "You're right. I'm sorry. I'll make it work." Emily nodded, though he couldn't see it. "Good. We'll talk later." As she hung up the phone, a sense of finality washed over her. It wasn't just about the schedule or the logistics. It was about standing her ground, reclaiming her voice. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she wasn't just reacting to life, but taking control of it. That evening, back at home, Emily sat down with a notebook in front of her. She opened it to a fresh page, the crisp blankness staring back at her, waiting. She had always been a planner, the kind of person who made lists and set goals. But for so long, her plans had revolved around other people, around David, around Ethan, around their life together. Now it was time to plan for herself. She wrote at the top of the page, "What do I want?" The question felt overwhelming at first, but as she began to write, the thoughts started to flow. Small things at first. She wanted to redecorate the house, to make it hers again. She wanted to find a new hobby, something that would bring her joy. She wanted to take Ethan on a trip, just the two of them, somewhere they could create new memories. And slowly, as the words filled the page, she realized that there was more to this new life than just surviving. There was room for hope. There was room for happiness. And maybe, just maybe, there was room for love again. One day, when she was ready. But for now, it was enough to focus on herself, to stand at the crossroads and choose her own path forward. The house felt different now. In the months that followed her confrontation with David and the finalization of their divorce, Emily had begun to make small changes to her home, starting with things as simple as rearranging the furniture and painting the walls. She had always hated the beige tones David insisted on, and now her living room was a bright, soothing shade of blue, like the sky after a storm. It felt like a fresh start, a reflection of the new chapter she was determined to write for herself. But it wasn't just the physical space she was transforming. It was her life. With each passing day, Emily felt herself growing stronger, more in control. She had started a new job at a marketing agency, a position that gave her both the freedom and challenge she had long craved. Her coworkers were a lively bunch, and while she was still finding her footing, the distraction of work helped her keep the lingering sadness at bay. There were moments, though, when the weight of it all came crashing down. Evenings, after putting Ethan to bed, were the hardest. The quiet reminded her of the life she used to have, of the partnership that had once filled this house. Sometimes, when the loneliness became too much, she would sit at the kitchen table with a glass of wine, scrolling through old photos on her phone. Pictures of family vacations, birthdays, and holidays. Each image was a snapshot of a time when everything seemed perfect, when her world was intact. But Emily knew those pictures didn't tell the whole story. They were moments frozen in time, untouched by the lies and betrayals that had come after. She had to remind herself of that, even as the nostalgia tugged at her heart. One evening, as she sat on the couch with a blanket wrapped around her, scrolling through her phone, she received a message from Sarah, one of her coworkers at the agency. Sarah was outgoing and vibrant, the type of person who could light up a room with her presence. Since Emily had started working there, Sarah had taken her under her wing, inviting her to lunch and encouraging her to get out more. "Hey, Em, a few of us are going out this weekend. Dinner, maybe some drinks after. You in?" Emily stared at the message for a moment, her thumb hovering over the screen. She hadn't gone out socially in months, not since the divorce. She had spent most of her time focused on Ethan, work, and healing. But maybe Sarah was right. Maybe it was time to start living again. "Sure, I'm in," she typed back, feeling a flutter of nervous excitement in her chest. That Saturday night, Emily found herself standing in front of her closet, staring at her clothes with a mix of anticipation and uncertainty. It had been so long since she dressed up for a night out, and part of her felt strange, almost like she didn't know how to be this version of herself anymore. She finally settled on a simple, elegant dress, something that made her feel confident without trying too hard. As she applied a light layer of makeup, she caught a glimpse of herself in the mirror and paused. It was the first time in a long time that she really looked at herself. And for the first time, she didn't see the broken woman she had been. She saw someone stronger, someone who had survived the worst of it and was still standing. The restaurant was buzzing with energy when Emily arrived. She spotted Sarah at a table near the back, surrounded by a small group of coworkers, all laughing and chatting. Sarah waved her over, her face lighting up as Emily approached. "There she is," Sarah exclaimed, pulling Emily into a quick hug. "I'm so glad you came." Emily smiled, feeling the warmth of the group's welcome. "Me too," she said, though a part of her still felt out of place, like she was stepping into a world she hadn't been part of in years. As the night went on, Emily found herself relaxing. The conversation flowed easily, filled with stories about work, mutual friends, and the funny quirks of their boss. It was refreshing, being around people who didn't know her as David's wife, who didn't see her as the woman whose marriage had fallen apart. Here, she was just Emily, herself, without the weight of her past hanging over her. At one point, Sarah leaned over and whispered, "So, anyone catch your eye yet?" Emily laughed, shaking her head. "I'm not really looking for that right now." Sarah raised an eyebrow, a teasing smile on her lips. "You're allowed to have fun, you know. You don't have to jump into anything serious, but a little flirting never hurt anyone." Emily's smile faded slightly, the thought of moving on from David still too fresh. She wasn't ready for anything new. At least, that's what she kept telling herself. But deep down, she couldn't deny that the idea of being with someone who saw her for who she was now and not who she had been was appealing. Maybe, one day, she would be ready. But tonight wasn't about that. Tonight was about rediscovering herself, about enjoying life again. A few weeks passed, and Emily continued to rebuild her life piece by piece. She threw herself into her work, excelling at the marketing agency in ways she hadn't anticipated. The challenges kept her mind occupied, and the sense of accomplishment gave her a renewed confidence she hadn't felt in years. Ethan was adjusting well to the new routine. Although the split schedule with David was hard on both of them, Emily made the most of the time she had with her son. They spent weekends going on little adventures, hiking in nearby parks, visiting museums, and making memories that belonged solely to the two of them. The bond between mother and son grew stronger with each passing day, and for that, Emily was deeply grateful. But the changes didn't stop there. Emily began to explore hobbies she had long forgotten about, things she used to love before her life had become consumed by her role as a wife and mother. She took up painting again, setting up a small studio in the corner of her living room. She enrolled in a yoga class, finding solace in the quiet strength of the practice. And slowly, she started to feel like herself again. Not the woman she had been in her marriage, but a new version of herself. Someone who had emerged from the ruins with a clearer sense of who she was and what she wanted. One evening, after tucking Ethan into bed, Emily sat down with her notebook again. It had become a ritual for her, writing down her thoughts, her goals, and the things she wanted to accomplish. This time, as she flipped to a blank page, she wrote at the top, "What's next?" She wasn't sure what the answer was yet. But for the first time in a long time, Emily wasn't afraid of the question. She wasn't afraid of the uncertainty that lay ahead. She had rebuilt herself, piece by piece, and now she was ready to step forward into whatever came next. Emily's life, once shattered by betrayal and heartache, was finally beginning to feel like her own again. She had built a routine that gave her structure and stability, but more than that, it gave her space. Space to breathe, space to rediscover who she was, and space to heal. But life, as it always does, had more surprises in store. It started with an unexpected encounter at the grocery store, of all places. It was a Sunday afternoon, and Emily was in the middle of her weekly shopping trip, carefully selecting fruits for Ethan's lunches. She reached for an apple at the same time as another hand did, and their fingers brushed lightly. Startled, she looked up to find a man smiling at her, his face warm and kind. "I'm sorry," he said, withdrawing his hand with a chuckle. "I didn't mean to steal your apple." Emily smiled back, feeling a slight flush of embarrassment. "No, it's fine. Plenty of apples to go around." He grinned, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "I'm Alex, by the way." He extended his hand, and without thinking, Emily took it. "Emily," she replied, her voice steady, but inside she felt an unexpected flutter of nervousness. For a moment, they stood there, awkwardly holding apples and introducing themselves in the produce aisle. Emily hadn't been in this kind of situation for so long that she almost didn't know how to react. But Alex seemed at ease, his demeanor relaxed and genuine, as though this sort of thing happened to him all the time. "Do you live around here?" Alex asked, breaking the silence. "Yeah, just a few blocks away," Emily said, her voice softening. "And you?" "Same," Alex replied, his smile never faltering. "Funny, I haven't seen you around before." "Well, I've been kind of preoccupied," Emily said, choosing her words carefully. She didn't feel the need to explain everything. Her divorce, her struggle to rebuild her life. But something about Alex's easygoing nature made her feel like she didn't need to. Alex nodded as if he understood more than she had said. Life tends to get in the way, doesn't it? They shared a brief, knowing smile, and Emily felt a strange sense of comfort in the moment. It had been so long since she had connected with anyone outside of her usual circle, and even though it was just a simple interaction, it felt like a tiny crack in the walls she had built around herself. After a few more moments of light conversation, they parted ways, but not before Alex said, "Maybe I'll see you around again, Emily." Emily smiled, and for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to feel the small spark of possibility. Maybe you will. Weeks passed, and Emily's encounter with Alex faded into the background of her busy life. But she found herself thinking about him at odd moments, while driving to work, while making dinner for Ethan. There was something about him that had stuck with her, a quiet warmth that lingered in her mind. Then, one Saturday morning, as Emily sat on the bleachers watching Ethan's soccer practice, she saw him again. Alex was standing on the opposite side of the field, watching a group of kids running around in bright uniforms. He hadn't noticed her yet, and for a moment, Emily considered staying invisible. But before she could decide, he turned, and their eyes met. His face lit up with recognition, and he made his way over to her, waving as he approached. "Emily, I didn't expect to see you here," Alex said, settling in next to her on the bleachers. "Same," she replied, smiling. "Is your son playing?" Alex nodded. "Yeah, that's him over there, number 7. His name's Tyler. He's obsessed with soccer." Emily laughed. "Ethan's the same way. I think he'd live on the soccer field if I let him." They both watched in comfortable silence for a few moments, the sounds of the kids' excited voices filling the air. Emily felt a strange sense of ease sitting next to Alex, like they had known each other for longer than the few brief moments they had shared. "So," Alex said, breaking the quiet, "do you come to these practices often?" "Every weekend," Emily replied. "It's become a bit of a routine for us." Alex nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I get that. I've been doing the single-parent routine for a while now, so weekends are all about Tyler." Emily glanced at him, her curiosity piqued. "Single-parent routine?" Alex nodded again, a slight smile on his lips. "Yeah, my wife and I separated a couple of years ago. It was messy, but we're making it work for Tyler's sake." Emily felt a flicker of surprise. She hadn't expected to hear something so familiar, so similar to her own story. "I can relate," she said quietly. "My divorce was finalized a few months ago. It's been an adjustment." They shared a brief, understanding look, and in that moment, Emily felt a connection, a bond forged from the shared experience of navigating the complexities of single parenthood and moving on after a broken marriage. "Well," Alex said, his voice lightening, "if you ever need someone to talk to about all this or just want to grab a cup of coffee sometime, I'm around." Emily smiled, feeling a warmth she hadn't felt in a long time. "I might take you up on that." Over the next few weeks, Emily and Alex began to see more of each other. It started with coffee after soccer practice, casual conversations that slowly turned into something deeper. They talked about their kids, their careers, and the challenges of balancing it all. But there were also moments of vulnerability, when they shared the pain of their past relationships, the struggles of moving forward, and the quiet fears that came with starting over. One evening, after their kids had gone to bed, Emily found herself on the phone with Alex, their conversation flowing effortlessly, as if they had known each other for years. There was something about him that made her feel safe, like she could be herself without the fear of judgment or rejection. "You know," Alex said after a long pause, his voice soft through the receiver, "I wasn't sure I'd ever feel like this again." "Like what?" Emily asked, her heart fluttering in her chest. "Like I could care about someone. After everything that happened with my ex, I thought I'd close that part of myself off for good." Emily felt a lump rise in her throat. She understood exactly what he meant. She had spent so long trying to heal, trying to put the pieces of her life back together, that she hadn't even considered the possibility of opening her heart again. But here with Alex, she felt something she hadn't expected: hope. "I know what you mean," she said quietly, her voice filled with emotion. There was a long pause on the other end of the line before Alex spoke again, his voice full of warmth. "Maybe we're both getting a second chance, Emily." Emily smiled, her heart full for the first time in a long time. "Maybe we are." Emily had always believed that time healed all wounds, but now, as she stood on the cusp of something new with Alex, she realized that some scars ran too deep to ever truly fade. It had been months since they first reconnected, and in that time, their relationship had grown in ways Emily hadn't anticipated. What had started as casual conversations over coffee and at soccer practices had slowly blossomed into something more: a quiet understanding, a shared vulnerability, and, if she was being honest with herself, the beginnings of love. But with that love came fear. Fear that the past could repeat itself, that opening her heart again could lead to more pain. Every time Alex looked at her with those kind, steady eyes, every time he reached for her hand or spoke in his soft, reassuring voice, Emily felt the walls she had built around herself begin to crumble. And yet, every time they grew closer, she felt the weight of her past pressing down on her, reminding her that trust was fragile, that love could be lost as easily as it was found. It was on a rainy Saturday afternoon, when Alex and Tyler came over for dinner, that Emily realized just how much those old fears still haunted her. The house was warm and lively, filled with the sound of Ethan and Tyler's laughter as they played video games in the living room. Alex had offered to help in the kitchen, and as they prepared the meal together, Emily couldn't help but notice how natural it all felt. "You're pretty good at this," Alex said, grinning as he chopped vegetables beside her. "I might have to put you in charge of dinner from now on." Emily laughed, her heart fluttering at his playful tone. "Oh, is that right? I didn't realize I was signing up to be your personal chef." "Well, I'm not complaining," Alex teased, bumping her shoulder lightly with his. The simple touch sent a wave of warmth through her, and for a moment, Emily let herself imagine what it would be like. This, every day, a life shared with Alex and their boys. It was a comforting thought, a glimpse of the future she had once thought impossible. But as they sat down to dinner, the conversation inevitably turned to their pasts. Tyler asked about Ethan's dad, and though the question was innocent, it sent a jolt of discomfort through Emily. She hadn't spoken much about David to Alex, hadn't wanted to delve into the complexities of her divorce and all the pain that came with it. She had tried to keep that part of her life separate, as if doing so could protect what she had with Alex from being tainted by old wounds. Still, she couldn't avoid it forever. Ethan's dad and we're not together anymore, she said slowly, glancing at her son, who had gone quiet at the mention of his father. We divorced a few months ago. Alex nodded, his expression gentle, but Emily could see the curiosity in his eyes, the questions he wasn't asking out of respect for her boundaries. She knew this moment was coming, the moment where she would have to open up, to let him see the parts of her that were still raw and vulnerable. Later that night, after the boys had gone to bed and the house had settled into a quiet lull, Alex sat beside Emily on the couch, his hand resting lightly on hers. "You don't have to talk about it if you're not ready," he said softly, his thumb brushing gently over her skin. "But I'm here if you want to." Emily swallowed hard, feeling the familiar knot of emotions tighten in her chest. She had spent so long trying to move past it all, trying to build a new life for herself and Ethan. But now, sitting here with Alex, the man who had slowly become her anchor, she realized that she couldn't truly move forward without confronting what was still holding her back. She took a deep breath, her voice shaky as she began to speak. "It wasn't just the divorce," she said quietly. "It was everything leading up to it. David, he cheated on me. For months, maybe longer. And when I found out, it was like my whole world just fell apart." Alex didn't say anything, didn't push her for more details. He simply listened, his presence a steady, calming force beside her. "I thought I could fix it," Emily continued, her voice breaking slightly. "I thought if I tried hard enough, if I was good enough, we could make it work. But he didn't want that. He wanted out. And I let him go because I didn't have a choice. But it still hurts. It still feels like I wasn't enough." Her words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of the pain she had carried for so long. She had never said those things out loud before, had never admitted to anyone how deeply David's betrayal had wounded her sense of self-worth. Alex turned to her then, his eyes full of compassion. "Emily, none of that was your fault. What David did, that was on him. Not you." "I know," she whispered, though the tears that slipped down her cheeks betrayed the doubt that still lingered in her heart. "But it's hard. It's hard to trust again, to believe that things can be different." Alex reached for her hand, holding it tightly. "I get that," he said quietly. "After what I went through with my ex, I didn't think I could trust anyone again either. But meeting you, it's different. I don't expect things to be perfect. I just want us to be real with each other. And if that means taking things slow, figuring it out as we go, then that's okay." Emily looked at him, her heart swelling with gratitude for his patience, for the way he understood without needing to be told. He wasn't asking her to rush, wasn't asking for more than she was ready to give. He was simply there, steady and supportive, offering her a place where she could be vulnerable without fear of being hurt again. "I want that too," she said, her voice soft but full of conviction. "I want to move forward. I'm just scared." Alex smiled, a small, reassuring smile that made her feel safe. "We'll figure it out together." For the first time in a long time, Emily felt the weight on her chest begin to lift. It wasn't gone, not entirely, but it was lighter now, easier to carry with Alex by her side. She wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time, she felt like she didn't have to face it alone. As the weeks passed, Emily and Alex continued to navigate their relationship, slowly and carefully. They spent time together with their boys, blending their lives in small, meaningful ways. There were still moments when Emily felt the old fears creeping back in, moments when she questioned whether she was ready for this new chapter. But every time, Alex was there, reminding her that it was okay to be afraid, that it was okay to take things one step at a time. The past was still a part of her, but it no longer defined her. With Alex, she was learning that love didn't have to be perfect to be real. It just had to be honest and patient and kind. And for the first time since her world had fallen apart, Emily allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she deserved to be happy again. The seasons were changing again. The vibrant colors of fall had begun to fade, and the crisp chill of winter was slowly settling in. With each passing day, Emily found herself growing more comfortable with Alex. The tentative steps they had taken toward each other had turned into something more solid, something that felt like it could last. But as their relationship deepened, Emily found herself confronted by ghosts from her past. The process of moving on wasn't as simple as she had hoped. One evening, as Emily and Alex sat on the couch together, a soft snowfall blanketing the world outside, she felt a wave of anxiety wash over her. They had just put the boys to bed after a long day of playing in the snow, and the house was quiet, peaceful. It should have been a perfect moment, but instead, Emily found her mind racing with doubts. "What's on your mind?" Alex asked, his voice gentle as he turned to her, noticing the tension in her posture. Emily hesitated, staring down at her hands as she struggled to put her feelings into words. "I've been thinking a lot about us," she admitted, her voice quiet, "and about David." Alex's expression softened, and he waited patiently for her to continue. "It's just, sometimes I wonder if I'm really ready for this," she confessed, her eyes still focused on her hands. "I love being with you. I really do. But there's a part of me that's still scared. I'm scared that what happened with David will happen again. I'm scared of trusting someone so deeply, only to be hurt." Alex reached for her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "Emily, I understand. I've had those same fears too, you know. After what happened with my ex, I wasn't sure if I'd ever be able to trust again. But being with you has shown me that love doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be honest. And if you're still scared, that's okay. We'll take it slow." Emily looked up at him, tears welling in her eyes. She had never expected to meet someone like Alex, someone who understood her fears without needing her to explain them, someone who was willing to take things slow no matter how long it took. "I don't want to lose this," she whispered, "but sometimes it just feels so fragile." Alex smiled, his eyes filled with warmth. "Love is fragile, Emily, but it's also strong. It grows stronger with time, with patience, and we have time. I'm not going anywhere." The reassurance in his voice settled her nerves, and Emily felt a sense of calm wash over her. Maybe it was okay to be afraid. Maybe it was okay to still carry some of the pain from her past. What mattered was that she wasn't carrying it alone anymore. As the days turned into weeks, Emily and Alex continued to build their life together, little by little. They spent weekends at each other's houses, slowly blending their routines, but never rushing into anything. It was a delicate balance, navigating the complexities of two separate lives coming together. Ethan and Tyler had grown close, their bond mirroring the relationship between Emily and Alex. The boys were practically inseparable, and the sight of them playing together brought a smile to Emily's face every time. It felt like a small piece of normalcy in the midst of all the changes. But as much as Emily tried to focus on the present, there were moments when the past still reared its ugly head. One evening, as she was packing up some old boxes in the attic, she came across a photo album she hadn't looked at in years. It was filled with pictures from her marriage to David, snapshots of vacations, birthdays, and anniversaries. Flipping through the pages, she was struck by how happy they had seemed back then, how perfect everything looked. But now, as she looked at those photos with fresh eyes, she saw the cracks, the smiles that didn't quite reach David's eyes, the distance between them even in the most intimate moments. She had been so blinded by her love for him that she hadn't seen the truth. And now, looking back, it felt like she was seeing it all for the first time. Emily closed the album, her heart heavy. She had spent so long trying to move past her marriage, trying to put those memories behind her. But they were still there, lingering in the corners of her mind, reminding her of the pain she had endured. Later that night, as she lay in bed, she felt a familiar ache in her chest. Alex was beside her, his presence a quiet comfort, but even his warmth couldn't chase away the lingering sadness. "I found some old photos today," she said softly, breaking the silence. Alex turned to her, his eyes filled with concern. "Photos of you and David?" Emily nodded. "It's strange looking back at those pictures. I thought we were happy. I really believed we had a good life together. But now I see all the things I didn't want to see back then. The distance, the disconnect. How did I miss it?" Alex didn't respond right away. Instead, he reached for her hand, holding it gently as he thought. "I think sometimes we see what we want to see," he said finally. "You loved him. You wanted things to work, so you held on to the good moments. There's nothing wrong with that. It doesn't make you weak. It just makes you human." Emily sighed, her heart heavy with the weight of his words. "I just don't want to make the same mistakes again." "You won't," Alex said firmly, "because you're not the same person you were back then. And neither am I. We've both been through a lot, but we've learned from it. We've grown. And that's what matters." Emily looked at him, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. She had spent so long doubting herself, doubting her ability to trust again. But maybe Alex was right. Maybe she wasn't the same person anymore. Maybe she had grown stronger through her pain, and maybe this time, things would be different. "I'm trying," she whispered, her voice soft but full of resolve. "I'm really trying." "I know," Alex replied, pulling her closer. "And that's all that matters." As winter deepened, so did Emily and Alex's relationship. There were still moments of doubt, moments when the past threatened to intrude, but they faced those moments together. With each passing day, Emily felt herself growing more comfortable with the idea of love, with the idea that maybe she deserved to be happy again. It wasn't long before they began talking about the future. Not in the abstract, but in real concrete terms. They talked about what it would look like to live together, to combine their families, to create a new life built on trust, patience, and love. And though the idea still scared her, Emily found herself feeling more excited than afraid. One snowy afternoon, as they sat by the fire watching Ethan and Tyler build snowmen in the yard, Alex turned to her, his expression serious. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice steady, "about us, about the future." Emily felt her heart skip a beat, her pulse quickening with anticipation. "What about it?" Alex smiled, a soft, genuine smile that made her feel safe. "I think we're ready. I think we're ready to take the next step." Emily looked at him, her heart swelling with emotion. She had known this moment was coming, had felt it building between them for weeks. And now, as she looked into his eyes, she realized that she was ready too. "I think so too," she whispered, her voice full of certainty. Alex leaned in, kissing her softly, his hand resting on her cheek. It was a kiss full of promise, of hope for the future they were about to build together. And for the first time in a long time, Emily felt like she could truly let go of the past, like she could finally embrace the love she had found in Alex. Winter was giving way to spring, the snow slowly melting into streams that trickled down the sidewalks, and the world felt like it was coming back to life. For Emily, it was symbolic of her own journey. The cold, harsh months of fear and doubt had begun to thaw, replaced by a quiet hope that the future could be bright again. But just as she started to settle into her new life with Alex, an unexpected shadow loomed on the horizon. David. It had been months since Emily had spoken to her ex-husband outside of necessary conversations about Ethan. Their communication had become strictly businesslike, with brief text messages exchanged about parenting schedules and school updates. Emily had built a wall between them, carefully keeping her emotional distance. She had moved on, both physically and emotionally, and in her mind, that chapter of her life was closed. But one afternoon, as Emily was picking Ethan up from school, she saw David standing near the school gate, waiting for her. He looked different, disheveled, worn. His once confident posture was slouched, and there was a heaviness in his eyes that she hadn't seen before. A knot formed in Emily's stomach as she approached him, wondering what he could possibly want. "David?" she asked cautiously, glancing down at Ethan, who had already run ahead to greet his friends. David looked up at her, his face lined with exhaustion. "Emily, can we talk?" Emily's first instinct was to refuse. She didn't want to rehash the past, didn't want to open old wounds that had barely healed. But there was something in his voice, a vulnerability she hadn't heard before, that made her pause. "About what?" she asked, her voice guarded. David sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I know I have no right to ask this, but I need to talk to you. I need to explain." Emily crossed her arms, her heart pounding in her chest. "Explain what, David? It's over. We've been through this." "I know," he said quickly, his voice cracking. "I know I messed everything up, but I can't live with the way we left things. I can't live with the guilt. I need you to understand." Emily stared at him, torn between the instinct to protect herself and the small part of her that still sought closure. She had spent so long trying to heal, to move forward. But maybe this conversation was something she needed, something that could finally put the past to rest. "Okay," she said slowly, "but not here. Let's meet later when Ethan's not around." David nodded, relief washing over his face. "Thank you, Emily. I'll text you." That evening, after Ethan was settled at a friend's house for a sleepover, Emily found herself sitting across from David in a quiet cafe. The air between them was thick with tension, and she could feel the weight of unspoken words hanging over them. David looked down at his coffee, his hands fidgeting with the cup. He seemed smaller than the man she had once known, as though the years had worn him down in ways she hadn't expected. "I don't know where to start," he said after a long silence. "I guess I just want to say, I'm sorry. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I need you to know that I'm sorry. For everything." Emily watched him carefully, her heart aching with a mixture of anger and sadness. She had waited so long to hear those words, but now that they were finally being spoken, they felt hollow, too little too late. "I don't know if sorry is enough," she said quietly, her voice steady. "You didn't just hurt me, David. You destroyed our family." "I know," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I didn't see it at the time. I was so caught up in my own selfishness, in trying to escape everything. I thought I could find happiness somewhere else. But I was wrong." Emily's chest tightened. She had spent years trying to understand why David had done what he did, trying to make sense of the betrayal that had shattered her life. And now, hearing him admit his faults, she felt an odd sense of relief. But it wasn't the kind of relief she had expected. It didn't make the pain go away, didn't erase the years of hurt and confusion. "Why now?" she asked, her voice soft but firm. "Why are you telling me this now?" David sighed, leaning back in his chair. "Because I've lost everything. I thought I could walk away from our marriage and that somehow I'd be happier. But I was wrong. I made a mistake, and I've been living with that guilt every day. I don't want to carry it anymore." Emily nodded slowly, her eyes locked on his. "I've moved on, David. I've found someone who cares about me, who treats me the way I deserve to be treated. I'm not angry anymore, but I can't go back. I've spent too long trying to heal, and I can't let you pull me back into that." David looked down at the table, his shoulders slumping in defeat. "I don't expect you to. I needed to tell you that I'm sorry, and I needed to tell you that I still care about you." Emily's heart ached at his words, but she knew they couldn't change the past. She had spent too long trying to repair what was broken between them. And in the end, she had realized that some things couldn't be fixed. "I care about you too, David," she said softly, "but not in the way I used to. We're different people now, and I've built a new life for myself with someone who makes me happy." David nodded, though the sadness in his eyes was unmistakable. "I understand. I guess I just needed to hear you say it." There was a long silence between them, the kind of silence that felt final, like the closing of a door. Emily realized, in that moment, that this was the closure she had been waiting for, the final break from the past, the moment where she could truly let go of the hurt and pain that had haunted her for so long. When she spoke again, her voice was calm, steady. "I forgive you, David, but I'm moving on. We both need to." David looked at her, his eyes filled with regret. But there was also a flicker of understanding, a recognition that this was the end of something that had long since run its course. "Thank you, Emily," he said quietly, "for everything." She gave him a small nod, and for the first time, she felt a sense of peace. The chapter with David was over, and though it had been painful, it had also been necessary. It had shaped her, had taught her how to survive, how to rebuild, and how to find love again. As she walked out of the cafe that evening, the cool air brushing against her skin, Emily felt lighter than she had in years. The weight of the past was finally gone, and for the first time, she was free. That night, when she returned home, Alex was waiting for her. He didn't ask her how it went, didn't press her for details. He simply held her, wrapping her in his arms, his presence a quiet comfort. Emily rested her head against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart. She had spent so long carrying the burden of her past, but now, standing here with Alex, she knew that it no longer had power over her. She had let go, she had forgiven, and now She was ready for whatever came next. Spring had fully arrived, and with it came a sense of renewal that mirrored the transformation happening within Emily. Her conversation with David had lifted a weight she hadn't even realized she was still carrying. For the first time in years, she felt like she had a clear view of the future, a future that didn't revolve around healing from old wounds, but one where she could embrace love and happiness on her own terms. The warmth of the season filtered through the windows of Emily's home as she sat at the kitchen table, sipping her morning coffee. She watched Ethan and Tyler playing in the yard, their laughter filling the air as they raced each other across the grass. Alex was outside with them, helping to build a treehouse, a project that had been in the works for weeks, something the boys had been begging for since winter. It was moments like this that made Emily's heart swell with gratitude. This was her life now, a life filled with love, with peace, with the hope of something beautiful ahead. As she watched Alex lift Ethan onto his shoulders to reach the higher branches, her phone buzzed on the table. It was a message from Laura, her best friend who had been by her side through the darkest moments of her divorce. "How's everything going with Alex? Haven't heard from you in a while, so I'm assuming good things." Emily smiled as she typed back, "Everything's great. I'll fill you in over coffee this week, but I can honestly say I'm the happiest I've been in a long time." It was true. For the first time in years, she felt at peace. She had built a new life for herself, one that was no longer defined by the past or the pain that had once consumed her. She had created something beautiful, not just for herself, but for Ethan too. Later that afternoon, as the boys ran inside to wash up, Alex came into the kitchen, wiping the sweat from his brow. He smiled at Emily, his eyes full of warmth. "The treehouse is almost done. Just a few finishing touches left." Emily grinned, feeling a wave of affection for the man who had so effortlessly become a part of her life. "You're their hero, you know that?" Alex chuckled, leaning against the counter. "I'm just doing what I can to make them happy, and to make you happy." "You do," Emily said softly, her heart swelling with emotion. "You make me very happy, Alex." He crossed the room, taking her hands in his, and looked deeply into her eyes. "I've been thinking a lot about us," he said, his voice serious yet filled with love. "About the future." Emily's pulse quickened, the intensity of his gaze making her heart race. "What about the future?" she asked, though she already had an idea of where this conversation was heading. Alex took a deep breath, his thumb gently caressing the back of her hand. "Emily, I love you. I've loved you from the moment I realized how strong, how resilient, and how kind you are, even after everything you've been through. You've given me hope again, hope that love can be real, that it can last." Tears welled up in Emily's eyes as she listened to his words. She had never expected to find love again, not after David, not after everything she had been through. But here it was, standing right in front of her, offering her a new beginning. "I love you too, Alex," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "I never thought I'd say that again, but I do. I love you with all my heart." Alex smiled, pulling her closer. "I want to build a life with you, Emily. I want to be here with you and Ethan for as long as you'll have me. I want us to be a family." Emily felt her heart swell, the tears now spilling freely down her cheeks. She had spent so long guarding herself, so long fearing that love would only bring more pain. But standing here with Alex, she knew that love didn't have to be perfect to be real. It just had to be honest and patient and full of hope. "I want that too," she whispered, her voice full of certainty. "I want us to be a family." Alex pulled her into a tight embrace, his arms wrapping around her as if he never wanted to let her go. And in that moment, Emily knew that she had found something she had thought she'd lost forever: home. The next few months flew by in a whirlwind of new beginnings. Emily and Alex began planning their life together, blending their families in ways that felt natural, like the pieces had always been meant to fit. They took the boys on weekend trips, exploring new places and creating memories that belonged solely to them. The treehouse became their shared project, a symbol of the life they were building together. Emily's relationship with Ethan grew stronger as well. He had adjusted remarkably well to the changes in their lives, and his bond with Alex had blossomed in ways that filled Emily with joy. She had always worried about how the divorce would affect him, but seeing him happy, surrounded by love, reassured her that they had both come through the storm stronger than before. One evening, as they all sat around the dinner table, laughing and sharing stories about their day, Emily felt a profound sense of peace. This was what she had fought for. This happiness, this love, this life that was full of hope and possibility. She no longer worried about the past, no longer feared that the pain would return. She had learned to trust again, learned to open her heart to the future, and in doing so, she had found something even greater than she had imagined. On a warm summer evening, a few months after that conversation in the kitchen, Alex proposed. It was a quiet moment, just the two of them sitting by the fire in the backyard, the stars twinkling above them. He didn't make a grand gesture, didn't have a speech prepared. He simply took her hand, looked into her eyes, and said, "Emily, I love you. I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Will you marry me?" And Emily, without hesitation, said yes. It wasn't the fairy tale proposal she might have once imagined, but it was real. It was perfect in its simplicity, just like their love. They didn't need grand gestures or promises of perfection. They just needed each other, and that was enough. Their wedding was a small, intimate affair, held in the garden of their home. Surrounded by family and close friends, Emily and Alex exchanged vows, promising to love each other through the ups and downs, through the joys and the struggles, through everything life would throw their way. As they stood together, hand in hand, looking out at the people who had supported them through their journey, Emily felt a sense of completeness she had never thought possible. She had found love again, not just in Alex, but in herself. She had learned that love wasn't about perfection. It was about choosing each other every day, even when things got hard. And as she looked into Alex's eyes, her heart full of love and hope, she knew that they would face whatever the future held together, because finally, after everything, she was home. This final chapter wraps up Emily's journey from heartbreak and betrayal to love and fulfillment. She has found peace, not only in her new relationship with Alex, but in her ability to trust herself and the future again. This chapter is a testament to the idea that love, though fragile, can be rebuilt with patience, honesty, and hope.